The off season is winding down. Teams are kind of finalizing their rosters. And so I thought now would be a good time to kind of look at the state of the Western Conference, especially obviously in relation to how it affects the Kings. And so I wanted to do that by looking at the state of each franchise, kind of what position each franchise is in coming into the season, and put them into five different categories. And these categories don't necessarily have to do with how good the team is necessarily going to be. This isn't a ranking of how good I think each team is, but as you'll see, it does kind of correlate to that. And so let's start at the bottom of the West in the rebuilding tier. And so we don't need to talk too much about this tier. It's the Spurs, obviously. Trailblazers, when the Dame trade happens. You have the Rockets, who tried to get better and signed some guys, but I don't really see them getting out of the bottom of the Western Conference, and I think they're still in that young rebuilding phase. And the Jazz, who are definitely a tough team, but I think they're still clearly a rebuilding team. And so those are teams, I don't think any of them are really going to give the middle to top of the West any trouble. Could we see the Rockets or Jazz maybe sneak into a play-in spot? I don't really see it. And so then we go to the next tier, which is the on the up tier. And this tier only has one team in it, and that's the Thunder. And so they're here because they have a lot of assets, they have a lot of good young players. They were a solid team last year, made the play in, were almost 500. And now there have been a lot of people, saying some crazy things like, oh, the Thunder could win 50 games. So there's definitely a little bit of overhype there, I think, because only two teams in the West won 50 plus games last year. I don't think the Thunder are quite there yet in terms of contending to win a playoff series. Could they make the play in, win the play in, get a playoff spot? I think that's possible. But I do think they're a little overrated right now, but obviously in a really good spot where maybe not this year, but like the next year, or the one after that, they could definitely give teams problems in the playoffs and be a really good regular season team. And that's kind of assuming they don't make a big trade this year, because they have the assets to make a big trade. And so if they do that, then they could, move up and be in a higher tier. And then we have this middle tier that I'm calling the in a weird spot. And each team is kind of in a weird spot for a different reason. So we'll go through each one individually. And there's three teams. The first one is the New Orleans Pelicans. And the obvious reason that they're in a weird spot is just they have two stars that are injury prone. Zion has barely played. Brandon Ingram is also pretty injury prone. They have an aging CJ McCollum. Trey Murphy is already going to miss the first part of the season. And so I just don't even know what to make of them. If they stay healthy, could they be a really good team? No doubt, but that's a big if. So they're definitely in a weird spot. The next team is the Minnesota Timberwolves, who I think could be a very good team this coming year. And so this is kind of why the tiers don't necessarily relate to how I think they'll do next year, because I think the Timberwolves are going to be really good with a healthy Cat, Rudy Gobert, an ascending Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels. Like, that is a very good core of players. And I think they're being a little underestimated coming in to this season. But the reason they're in a weird spot is because they have no assets. And it's just like, where do they go from there? Because they're not going to go into a full rebuild in the next couple of years because they have Anthony Edwards and Karl-Anthony Towns, mostly Anthony Edwards. But it's just like, how do they make moves to get better is why they're in a weird spot. And then you have the Dallas Mavericks, because they have Kyrie Irving. And any team with Kyrie Irving is in a weird spot. Obviously, the Luka Kyrie thing last season did not work at all. But you'd think that it'll be a little better. Coming into this season, they'll have figured it out a little bit. They added Grant Williams, added Rashawn Holmes, who I think will have a resurgent year in a system that fits him more. But they don't have much else. And so they should be better than the 11th seed. But it's kind of weird to predict where they're going to be or where they go from here. Because obviously they want to keep Luka happy, which is why they made a move. But it's also kind of just making a move for the sake of making a move, which is why it kind of put them in a weird spot. Then we move on to the tier that I'm calling the hovering around the top tier, and that is the Kings and the Grizzlies. Both teams have good young cores, but they are not all in yet. Obviously, Ja's going to miss the start of this season for the Grizzlies, and they made that Marcus Smart trade, shipping out Tyus Jones. The Kings kind of just improved around the edges and still have a lot of assets. And so I think it's two teams that are young, up and coming, and still are just kind of biding their time. And two teams that could make a big move to vault them into the all-in status to go for it for a championship. And I think two teams that are in a really good spot, Grizzlies, if Ja Morant figures his stuff out. If he does, then both teams in a really good spot, I think, for the coming years, because they're the 2 and 3 seeds, but still not all in yet, which is a good sign for any team. And then you have the biggest tier, which is the all-in tier. And this is why the West is so crazy. You have so many teams that I feel are all in. And so the Nuggets are there, obviously. They won the championship. They're going to try to win the championship again. They have a lot of expensive players in Jokic, MPJ, Jamal Murray, which is why they lost Bruce Brown. And it's only going to get harder to make moves with expensive teams with the new CBA. And so their, title window is open now, and they got to take advantage because it will close pretty quickly, I think. Obviously, with Jokic, they'll always be good, but I don't think anything else needs to be said about them. Then you have the Suns. I don't think I really need to say anything about that. They are all in. The Lakers are all in because they have an old LeBron and an aging AD. And sure, they have a solid rest of the team, but it all revolves around LeBron and AD. So if LeBron retires, it's over. And their window has closed. With the Warriors, they're all in. Obviously, trading Jordan Poole for CP3 cemented that, even though I think it was already the case. I don't think that move makes them better even, but it makes them older, and they're just a very old team. And then you have the Clippers, Kawhi, Paul George. We don't know what's going to happen with them. So they've been in win now mode for a while with those two, and they just can't seem to make it happen. And so that window is closing, and this may be the last year for them to truly go for it. Those are the 5 tiers I have, and where all 15 teams reside in them. And the reason that I wanted to make these tiers is because for so much of this offseason, people have been saying the Kings didn't improve or barely improved, and the rest of the West is improving. And so looking at the state of the West, you have so many teams that are all in right now. But not even all of those teams are necessarily better than the Kings. And I think the Grizzlies, again, are in the same boat. You look at the Clippers, I don't think they're better than the Kings. Warriors, I think they got worse. So I don't think they're better than the Kings. I think the Clippers probably got worse, but it's all about health for them. Lakers got better, but I think the Kings can still compete with them. And then I don't think the Kings are as good as the Suns or the Nuggets. But the difference is the Kings are not all in like those teams. Once you go all in, you have a pretty restricted title window most of the time. Not everyone gets to the situation the Warriors had where they were able to sign all their guys to non-max contracts and then win a championship and then sign Kevin Durant because of the contract situation they have and then keep winning. Like, that is so rare. Most teams' title windows are extremely short, so the Kings have to be very smart about when they really go for it. So not locking themselves into a bad Jeremy Grant contract or even a Kyle Kuzma who they probably would have had to offer a lot of money to come because, by all accounts, he wanted to stay in Washington where he had a bigger role. And that's why I am okay with the Kings, where the Kings are right now, because I think they're in such a great spot to keep adding around the edges like they have, and then have guys develop. And the biggest piece of all of that is Keegan Murray. If he can develop into what they think he can, which is a star player, then you have to give that time to happen. And the Kings have that time. And then once you see the right moment where maybe the West has been weakened a little bit by some of those all-in teams a couple of years from now dropping off and going back to rebuilding like the NBA cycle is, then you can pounce on trading for maybe a star or just trading for a lot of good players with all the assets that you have, and that's when you go for it. The West is so competitive right now, and it is a competitive most of the time, but maybe right now isn't the right time to go all in, and I think that's what the Kings front office is seeing and why they didn't make a big move like so many people wanted them to. Of course, there will be teams below the Kings in these tiers that I've made that are going to be rising as other teams from the top are falling. That's just how the NBA works. But I think the Kings are right now in one of the best positions in the Western Conference to win in like 2, 3 years from now. As long as Sabonis and Fox maintain their level and Keegan Murray can develop, then the Kings are going to be able to contend for titles in a few years, in a couple of years maybe. And while we're waiting for that, this team is still going to be good. This team was still the 3rd seed, and I think still improved. And I think a lot of people saying that the rest of the West has improved is pretty overblown. Honestly, the top of the West is aging. The Nuggets maybe not so, but the Suns are aging. Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, Lakers, obviously, Warriors definitely are, and Clippers are. And I think the Kings are kind of in one of the best positions of the teams that aren't aging. They're right there with the Grizzlies and then the Thunder, I think. And now I'm saying, the Kings can contend in a few years. That doesn't mean that they can't, win a few playoff series this coming season. And if everything went right, that doesn't mean they couldn't make the finals. Like, I think that the Kings could be a dark horse to come out the West if everything goes right, mostly in terms of health. Because, like I said, I think there's only 2 teams that are clearly better than the Kings. And then there's just a mosh pit of other teams. But I'm super excited for this season. I just want it to start already. I want to see Sasha Vezenkov play. I want to see all the new players, Chris Duarte, Colby Jones, and what they're going to add. I can't wait to see Keegan Murray's growth. So make sure to hit that subscribe button so you can join me for this upcoming season as I talk about the Kings. And anyways, that is it for this episode of the Roll Report, and I will see you guys later. Peace.